Good morning, everyone. First of all, it gives me great pleasure to invite you all to the first talk in the Grid Invited lecture series. Although this is the first which has been open to everybody apart from the Grid team, we have had these lectures in the past internally. So before I introduce the speaker for today, Dr. Pankaj Shah, I would first like to mention some rules for housekeeping. We would request all the participants to put their microphones on mute so that, and if you have any queries, please put it in the chat box. There is a team in the backend who will be collating all your queries and they will be answered during or at the end of the session. Now, I would request Dr. Archesman Mohapatra, Executive Director of Grid Council, to tell briefly about Grid Council and its vision and mission.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kavita. Good morning, everyone, and I'd like to extend my heartfelt thanks to Pankaj sir for sparing his time and agreeing to talk to us, and to the audience for joining in. And it seems very promising, a session in the morning today, where we'll be taking up an important topic for discussion. Now, Grid Council is basically it's a new organization, it's a small organization dedicated to multi-site epidemiological studies, and it's a non-profit organization, and it operates mostly as a network of medical colleges. We are currently and shall always be very lean in the center. So it's a hub and spoke model where all research activities would be done through the network. And the principle is that we connect like-minded people together so that we do good science. For example, let us take the example of, say, leptospirosis or scrub typhus. Now, faculty who are interested to do research on this particular scrub typhus, for example, are located in different medical colleges across India. So why not create a platform where all these people could come together, design a research, get funded, and do it at respective sites. So that's the model on which this works. We have been able to come up with a paper and some more papers where we have engaged with network partners as co-authors across 45 medical colleges. Now the network is still growing, and we are planning for more studies. For capacity building, we have had the fortune of having eminent people come and talk to our team, which is a small team. And this happens almost every weekly to 10 days. This week, we suddenly realized that why keep it so internal? Why can't we just open it, like make it public? So whoever is interested can join. These sessions are informal ones. We keep on interacting. So we opened it, and we found that there is there are people interested who want to attend these kind of discussions, participate in them. We had about 100 registrations. 27 of us are here today. Of course, this will be recorded and shared. We had no idea that ethical guidelines would be looked up to so excitedly by people, and I see many senior members are also enrolled. We do not have a pulse of things like what exactly India needs in terms of research. We do understand that there is very patchy understanding of research and capacity consequently, but how do we standardize? So I would request that in follow-up to today's meeting, if you could share any topics that would interest you, and if you have a speaker in mind, please recommend him or her to us. We'll try and reach out. Usually people are eager to train and share their wisdom. So if you could give us some topics, we'll arrange those kind of sessions, 1 hour, 1.5 hours, some interaction. It helps in knowing things to a better depth than reading books. So these are lived experiences. So without further delay, I'd go back to Kavita madam for the needful. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining in. Let's interact.
Thank you, Dr. Archesman, for talking to us about Grid Council. I would want to introduce the speaker for the day, Dr. Pankaj Shah. So Dr. Pankaj, apart from being a very good friend, is an MD in Preventive and Social Medicine from University of Bombay. Is presently working as the Professor and Head Department of Community Medicine at SRMC and Research Institute, Chennai, and also serving as the Member Secretary IEC at his institution for the past 10 years. He has been the faculty for training of WHO medical officers on epidemiology, research, and research ethics. He's also a member of various national and international committees on research and medical education, and he has contributed to funded projects of WHO, Government of India, SPARC, etc. He's also the author and reviewer of Cochrane systematic reviews and member of scientific committees of various Cochrane colloquium. With that introduction, I present to you Dr. Pankaj Shah.
Thank you to the Executive Director, Sir, Archisman Mohapatra and Kavita for taking a new initiative on a new day. We know today in Chennai we are celebrating Pongal, in North India Makar Sankrant, and there are so many different festivals with different name to start, and probably it is a good day to start with the new beginning. And hopefully it's a new beginning, because last year we had a tough time in COVID, and probably a time has come when we have to bounce back to the new reality of life with COVID pandemic and beyond. Kavita, please confirm if I'm audible.
Yes. Loud and
Okay.
clear.
Anytime I become unaudible, please interrupt me and let me know.
Sure.
As it was mentioned that there are certain ground rules, you can please write your questions in the chat box, and I'll be happy to know and answer those questions if I know. And if I don't know, I'll be very happy and honest enough to say I don't know. Probably I have a relatively little experience, and I will start with the same thing which I was telling earlier. Experience is nothing but gaining years when somebody has done some or other mistakes, and many times we balloon our mistakes to call it as an experience. So even whatever I have learned from smallest mistake of my life, probably I'll be able to share with you, so that all of us probably learn from each other's mistake. People learn from their successes very well, no doubt about it, but a time has come when we have to learn from each other's mistake. Second thing, a shorter say on the webinar. Uh, you must have read that WhatsApp, when people used to say that when somebody talks in air, earlier it was called as delusion, hallucination, and all kind of psychiatric disorders. But today I am going to do the same thing, and the terminologies has changed in the new era as a webinar. Also, many times when we attend these kind of sessions in a conference or in a guest session, our purpose is to most important purpose is to get the certificate, and probably at time also we want to have some amount of knowledge. And after 1 hour, many times we say excellent session on the face, but in our heart we know that that speaker, whatever he's talked, is not worth topic. Hopefully I will not waste your time for next 1 hour, and probably you will have at least few take home message which will improve your research ethics and how we move further for this thing in COVID-19 era. As a the issue became important and so many people have registered, and I will go with the Mahatma Gandhi say, which said, one person begin the show and people will follow. Probably sooner or later more and more people will follow us, and hopefully the research which is being done always done ethically, and there is a lot of acceptance by the community on that research when it is done ethically. With so much initial introduction, I'll come back to the topic where I'm going to talk on ethical guidelines for research involving human participants, COVID-19 pandemic and beyond. Actually, if you see during my whole session, I'm going to talk something which is in pre-COVID era, which has to be continued during COVID-19 pandemic and beyond. And there are certain new things which got added up because of COVID-19. And though we are all practicing physical distancing, vaccine is it just available, and whatever said and done, COVID will not disappear so easily, and probably COVID will become our life partner forever also. And that's why we have to keep updating our research ethic guidelines as we move on. And COVID-19 has taught us how the science is evolving, and same way the ethics guidelines are also going to evolve over a period of time. All the researchers have some or other experience on ethics committee. I had all the similar committee probably 10 years, 15 years back down the line. And unfortunately, many of our experiences are not humanly in nature. And you may not write in the chat box, but if you touch your heart, many times you must have felt that this ethics committee people do not understand anything and they have to be killed. That kind of unpleasant experience many times unfortunately happens between the researchers, investigators and ethics committee members. And probably these kind of evolving session will help us to create a bridge, a nice bridge, a human experience bridge between the ethics committee member and research, because interest of both the groups is to evolve science and improve the ethically conducted research. We need to understand ethics is also a dynamic science. A thing which was ethical few years back or few decades back may not be ethical today, and the things which are ethical today may not be in the evolving science ethical tomorrow. And that's why as the science is developing, the ethical science is also going to be developing, and it is going to be a dynamic science. Usually, when we start any PowerPoint, people look at the number of slides. Just to honestly telling that number of slides are 47, and I do not think so. I will take more than 50 minutes or so, and probably then we can have a nice time for discussion. In between, the organizers wants to have some poll to make sure and understand the people are not electronically logged in and they are physically and mentally also present. And I hope you will be able to answer those questions very nicely what we are discussing. Many of those questions you may also know about it, but intentionally those questions are put to find out if those are the important take home message. I usually like to use a PDF file in Google Meet, so that at the same time I can have access to both the tab, that is the Google Meet, as well as my slides. Now, basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about 3 important or 4 important guidelines briefly. That is the National Ethical Guidelines for Biomedical and Health Research Involving Human Participants 2017, National Ethical Guidelines for Biomedical Research Involving Children 2017. This was the first time when the exclusive booklet came from ICMR on the research for children. Then recently, New Drugs and Clinical Trial Rules of 2019 came into picture, which was a big guidelines with a lot of additions, and also which involves the registration of all the ethics committees which were doing not only clinical trial but also other kind of biomedical and health research. And then finally, on 6 May 2020, National Guidelines for Ethical Committees Reviewing Biomedical and Health Research During COVID-19 Pandemic also came into picture. I would have been happy to keep this as a title, but this title was very, very long. Basically, we are going to just take a summary of these guidelines. These guidelines are very, very exhaustive, and people can read those guidelines because those guidelines have become more and more explanatory in nature, with the disclaimer that next 45 minutes to 1 hour, we are only going to talk on the silent features of these guidelines. To start with, we need to understand what is the meaning of ethics. Ethics has come from the Greek word, which means ethikos, arising from habits, just to merely tell us what is right or what is wrong. And many times it is nothing but the moral of science which a group or a religion or a particular profession follows. Say, for example, many times we say publication ethics, we talk about political ethics, we talk about school ethics, and so many terminology we use along with ethics, basically to tell us what is right or wrong. Before 2007 guideline came into picture, there was 2006 guidelines which were available, and we were following those 2 guidelines. One was the ICMR guideline for biomedical research, and there was second guideline on stem cell research. Now, if you see here, the guideline used very clear word on human participants. The subject and the participant has a clear-cut meaning. A participation means that the human being has participated in the research. That means the voluntary mechanism has taken place and informed consent has taken a due course, so that the proper participation has gone. And that's why when 2017 guideline came into picture, it always talks about ethical guidelines involving human participants, because when the human beings are involved as a participant, then only the true science which is ethically done comes into the picture. As I was telling you, 2017 the guideline got revised. There was a need to revise these guidelines because there was a lot of scientific development from 2006 to 2017 has happened, and those changes were happening in the technology, in the social behavioral nature. A lot of disasters were coming, humanitarian grounds, lot of studies needs to be required. And as far as technology is concerned, lot of artificial intelligence came into picture, machine learning came into picture. And you must have realized in COVID-19 we use a lot of models, and those technological evolution needed to have a separate guidelines. And in 2017, those guidelines got revised, incorporating all those new advances which came into the picture. As I was telling you, this was the first time in 2017 when the national guideline came specifically for children. And then also at the same time, stem cell research guidelines also got revised. As I was telling you again, on 6 May 2020, because of the COVID epidemic, ICMR came out with two important things. One was the National Guidelines for Ethics Committee reviewing biomedical and health research during COVID-19 pandemic. And also it came out with a standardized ICMR IEC submission form, which is now almost obligatory and mandatory for all ethics committee to use that kind of ICMR IEC form. Now, as we are talking about, the guidelines are changing, and ethics is a dynamic science. We need to understand whatever happens in ethical guidelines, it is going to revolve around four basic principles, which are nothing but the four important pillars of research ethics. One is autonomy. That means we have to respect each and every human being when they participate in the research, do only good for them, do not do the harm, and there should be a distributive justice. A meaning of distributive justice means each and every person has an equal chance of getting participation in the research, irrespective of their income, irrespective of their gender, irrespective of their religion or any affiliation to anything. Same way, when the benefits are realized, the distributive justice indicates that all the benefits of the research has to be provided to all the people equally, irrespective of their income, gender, religion, or any kind of a affiliation. The equal distribution has to be there, and these are the four basic principles which are not going to change even if the guidelines are going to be revised over a period of time. In addition to those four important pillars, there are certain basic guidelines. If you read those guidelines, these are nothing but the simple common sense. A study has to be done when it is only essential in nature. It is a common sense. There should be a voluntary participation of the individuals. Now, whenever I talk about voluntary participation of individual, I always come across, or in my mind, thinking about, I don't know if you have seen on National Geography, there is one documentary comes up which talks about airline crash investigations. Now, if you see there, if you see those documentary also talks about how the protocol is written and how those protocols needs to be implemented. Also, I come across certain examples where many times we ask the people to join the group as a team, but their voluntary participation may or may not come. The voluntary participation has to be a clear understanding of the research proposal, and after understanding only those research proposal, the human being understands and realizes the importance of participation. Say, for example, as a HOD or as an in charge of a team, I may involve all 7-8 members of my team in a research. Actually, they may not be willing to participate, but since I am the in charge of that team, they may not have enough courage to say no, and that's why the voluntary participation is getting lost. And that's why we need to understand, as a clinician, as a head of the department, as an in charge of the team, we have to make sure all the participants who are taking part in the research, there should be a complete voluntary participation. Many times people do a lot of work nowadays on the medical education, and they feel that probably the studies which are done on students may not need a ethics committee approval or informed consent. We also need to understand students are also vulnerable population, because their marks, their scoring, their rank is dependent on the teacher. And when they realize that my marks, my rank and my percentage, eligibility, gold medal, etc. is going to be depending on my teacher, it's very difficult to say no to a research proposal where they are asking me to take a participant. And in such a case, student also becomes a vulnerable population, and we need to be very, very careful for the voluntary participation. As very explicitly said, it should be a non-exploitation of anybody. Privacy and confidentiality has to be maintained, no doubt about it. Now, confidentiality is important. That's why many times we collect the information and the data is anonymized before we do the data analysis or it is shared with anybody. Privacy also have to be maintained. Many times when we have to show the face of the individual, we block the eyes of the person. Probably that was an earlier era time when the eyes blocking was considered as we are giving the total privacy. But nowadays we need to blur the whole face, and we need to take a separate informed consent whenever the patient's identity is going to be disclosed. Especially when the face comes into the picture, many other body parts when they are photographed, again informed consent is required, but there may or may not be possibility of identification. Precaution and risk minimization has to be taken so that no risk comes to any of the participant of the research. Wherever possible, the risk should be as minimum as possible. And whenever the risk is becoming higher because of the participation of research, the researcher has to inform the participant in a great informed consent detail. In India, informed consent process is slightly tricky, and we will discuss in later phase. Individual may not be alone in a position to take the informed consent, and many times the family members comes into the informed consent process, and even those kind of cultural beliefs have to be taken care of. Professional competence is very, very important. If I am not competent to do a particular research, naturally I cannot be the principal investigator. Probably because of my knowledge in the methodology, I can be co-investigator. And that's why the team members have to have a professional competence. Is not the guest membership in the author or the guest thing in team development, but is the what each and every member gets into the team is very, very important. And each and every member has to be professionally competent in the aspect what they are planning to do in the research. As I was telling you, accountability of the complete part of the research is very, very important. If I'm not wrong with the date, I think in 2013 or so, the medical journal international guidelines got revised, saying that each and every author is responsible for each and every aspect of the article. Earlier, we could say that I had contributed this component and probably I am only accountable for those aspects. But now after 2013, each and every author is responsible for each and aspect of the article. Transparency is very, very important. You must have realized when we search internet for any particular article or any particular important protocol or something, and you realize that after clicking on that with great difficulty, they say you pay a certain amount of fees for accessing that article for 24 hours or permanently. And that's why transparency is very, very important. There are various mechanisms by which transparency can come. The team can display the whole protocol on the public domain in the website. We have a CTRI and the Clinical Trial Registry of India, clinicaltrial.gov, where the studies can be disclosed in advance before the study is started, before the first enrollment of the human participant. Then also, in case of a PubMed Central, the NIH funded articles and the publications are made available as an author manuscript. So there are n number of mechanisms by which the transparency can be provided, or we can publish into those journals which give the copyright to all the authors, and they can circulate in a different forum. Also, we need to remember, we always have to think about the maximization of public interest and distributive justice. Nowadays, a time has come where the multiple institution comes together, and there should be a proper understanding among those institutions in the form of a MOU, how those things will be done. And many times people do the research and the burning comes at the time of authorships, where many people want to be author and which may or may not be possible. And that's why a lot of institutions arrangement required, not only for the planning, research, funding, applying and funding mechanism and authorship and patent. As I was telling you, transparency and public domain goes in hand, and we have to make it possible as far as available. We, in short, have to be totally responsible, and we have to compliance with all the guidelines which are required. Even set and all important individuals who are required for which this therapy or the research is being conducted, they should be involved. But there are certain special group of people whom we need to be very, very careful, and they may become vulnerable. Say, for example, pregnant females and nursing women. A study should be permitted in pregnant women or nursing women only if, or lactating mother only if it involves the advances of health and the pregnant women or nursing women or fetuses or nursing infants. If the same study can be conducted in an adult non-pregnant female, in case of an adult non-lactating mother, then study cannot be permitted in those females. Also, we need to understand the same phenomena. If the same study can be conducted in an adult male, 100%, a pregnant female and a lactated mother, that study cannot be permitted. Same principle revolves around the children. The studies which are done among children has to be exclusively pertaining to research parameters or the diseases which involves children. If the same study can be done in an adult population, the study may not be permitted in children. And proxy consent or the indirect consent or informed consent is required from the parents of the children whose children are less than 7 years and whose children are more than 7 years to 18 years. In addition to parents' consents or a legal guardian consent, assent of a child is also required. Assent of a child means we will inform the child that your parents have agreed to you to take part in this study, and since you are more than 7 years to 18 years, you are requested to say yes or no depending on your understanding of the research and your participation. And if the child doesn't give assent for that, then naturally the study cannot be conducted even if the parents have agreed upon. As I was telling you, there are n number of vulnerable population which are there. Those populations are the students. Those populations are the people who are working under me as a team. And those are all vulnerable populations because they are not able to say no. Prisoners are one of the classical vulnerable groups. So in that case, researcher and ethics committee have to take into consideration that we have to be very, very careful, and we need to understand this vulnerability whenever we are talking about. Again, to re-emphasize, the personal privacy and confidentiality is very, very important. Next important issue comes is the conflict of interest. Now, conflict of interest is very, very important thing and is an evolving science. Many times it is very difficult to have a no conflict of interest. Say, for example, I am doing a study and the study is conducted by a company where I have an investment. There is no harm as a principal investigator to inform the study participants that I have some investment in the company where I am doing the study, because since there is a possibility that company has funded my fellowship or a program where I got trained for certain. Since I have become an expert now, I am requested to give my sharing of experience. In such a way, conflict of interest may be always present. There is no harm in having some amount of conflict of interest, but problem comes when these conflict of interests are not disclosed properly. And that's why now evolving science, more bigger and bigger form of conflict of interest has come, and we have to always disclose our conflict of interest. Many times we are not sure that certain item, what we are thinking is conflict of interest or no, is better to disclose and let the reader or the person who is reading and wants to apply that science can probably go for understanding of the conflict of interest affecting my study results or not affecting study result. Now, coming to this initial introduction of ethics committee, in many times they use also the words called as IRB or the institutional review board. Institutional review board is a classical term which is being used abroad. IC is the classical term which is being used in India. More or less, institutional ethics committee and institutional review board are almost of the same nature. And we need to understand that all proposals on biomedical research involving human participant has to be reviewed by institutional ethics committee and institutional review board. Why I am emphasizing all proposals is because many times people have understanding whenever I am planning to go for a publication, only that time the proposal have to go to ethics committee. If I am planning to go for an oral presentation or a poster presentation in a conference, then I need not go to ethics committee. That is a totally wrong concept. Whenever I am planning an oral or poster presentation, even at that point of time, I am planning my objectives, I have decided my methodology, and I have also decided the plan of analysis and done the analysis. That means my study is already over. When the study is already over, ethics committee cannot give a retrospective approval for a study when the study is already over. And that's why all the research proposals have to undergo for ethics committee approval. And that's why we need to plan well in advance. For even for oral and poster presentation, many times we realize the conference is there at the dead end, and that time we may think that we do not have a time of ethics committee. That is probably 100% wrong, because even for oral and poster presentation, ethics committee approval is required. All of us know how we prepare for conference. We know a particular city or which is not seen by me or my family members. In addition to the academic content also becomes important part, and probably those kind of planning can be done well in advance. Usually nowadays people announce their conference almost 1 year ahead of time, and in such a way we can plan in advance and make sure oral and poster presentation are also going through the ethics committee before they are submitted to the conference secretariat. And that's why I want to again and again emphasize, all proposals on the biomedical research involving human participant has to be reviewed. Many times issue comes with the data which is collected on the administrative basis. Now say for example, I am the secretary of a medical education or the coordinator. I am collecting lot of feedback forms from the student on day-to-day basis. Should it go to ethics committee? Now we need to understand the purpose for which those feedback forms are collected. When I am collecting as a coordinator of MEU, those feedback forms, my primary purpose is the administrative purpose or a program evaluation. My primary purpose is not research. My primary purpose is not publication. In that case, informed consent is not required. But when I want to publish that information in the anonymized form, where the student names will not be disclosed, and those recorded stored data from my medical education unit, or for that matter patient data in the medical records, are going to be used for publication purpose, then ethics committee approval is required. So administrative things comes as an order which needs to be performed as a part of the institutional organization framework, but whenever it goes in the form of a research under the banner of research for publication, it has to undergo through ethics committee. But still there can be some exceptions. Case report. Now, case report is slightly tricky thing, where a certain group of people believes that the case report do not need ethics committee approval, needs only informed consent from the patient whose data is taken. But there are a group of people who believes that case report is also an initial baby step or the first step for the research, and that's why the case report also should undergo through ethics committee. I have seen nowadays there are few journals who even ask the ethics committee approval or no objection certificate for case report even at this stage, and sooner or later it may become a regular phenomena for case report. A planned case series which I have decided in advance 100% needs ethics committee approval. There are so much data available in the bioinformatics form in a public domain, genetic data, and since these are all anonymized data, probably those kind of research involving in public domain do not need ethics committee approval. Database available in public domain, as we have talked about, need not be having ethics committee approval. Systematic reviews and meta-analysis do not need to have ethics committee approval, but there are special kind of systematic reviews and meta-analysis called as individual patient data systematic reviews and meta-analysis. Since the individual patient data in the anonymized form is being used, the ethics committee approval is required, and that's why it's always better not to remember these exceptions. Just blindly remember that all proposals on biomedical research where I am looking at a publication at a later end, ethics committee approval is mandatory, and you can approach the ethics committee member secretary or the members to get a better idea if the ethics committee approval is not required, because many times we remember the so-called exceptions and then we land up in the problem. Probably I have spoken almost for 20 minutes, and I think Dr. Kavita may like to have one poll session in between. If that is possible, Dr. Kavita, please go ahead.
Yeah, actually the poll is live, and if you can see on your beside your chat window, there is a icon with a triangle, square, and a circle. So just click on that. There are 2 poll questions right now, so you can answer both of those.
The poll number 1 question probably can be answered later, because that I have not talked so far, but you can still answer if you have a general knowledge, no problem.
Excuse me, ma'am, where exactly is the poll?
Okay, just beside your chat window on top, there is an icon with a triangle, square, and a circle. I hope
It's
is
not
it with-
visible in the mobile. Can you share the
Okay.
link in the chat box so that we can have access?
Acha, I'll put up the question. 1 second. I'll put up the question here.
Yes.
I'll
Thank
do
you.
that. Yeah.
Kavita, in that case, please put only the question number 2, which we have discussed so far.
Yeah. I'll do that. I'll put the question. Pankaj, you want to continue? I'll put the question in the chat box till then.
Okay, no problem. The question which was planned was, at this stage, I am planning an oral or poster presentation in a conference. Do I need ethics committee approval? Probably if you want, you can write as yes in the chat box or no in the chat box, or at least you need to have a take home message that even oral and poster presentation need ethics committee approval. I'm thankful to all those people who have answered yes, and all those people who are thinking still to answer or not to answer or say no. Again, to revise them that even if we are planning an oral or poster presentation in a conference, we need to have ethics committee approval. Now we'll go to the next part of the session because the poll has not become as live poll as should be. What is the basic responsibility of ethics committee? As I was telling you many times, unfortunately, we do not get a human experience when interacting with ethics committee, and that kind of experience has to change. And that's why we would like to have these kind of sessions so that the members understand the researcher, and at the same time, the researcher also understand the ethical committee members and their obligations and responsibility. The basic purpose of responsibility of IEC or IRB is to protect dignity and rights and the well-being of the research participant, also ensure that the ethical values are maintained, and most important, it wants to protect the research community so that later on no part we get any kind of allegation and the disbelief or the misbelief comes among the population before utilizing those research output. And also we need to understand, since we cannot be expert in each and every aspect of life as well as research, probably ethics committee members will be more evolved and more knowledgeable on those evolving guidelines, and naturally appearing to ethics committee committee will 100% evolve our science to a next level, and our scientific standards will improve. That's the main purpose of committee. As I was telling you, there are n number of committees which revolves around research. As I was telling you, abroad they usually use the word ethics review board or institutional review board. In India, we classically use the word institutional ethics committee. There are organizations where there is a scientific committee which looks at the scientific aspect, but we need to understand scientific committee purpose is to look at the scientific aspect. The institutional ethics committee purpose is to look both scientific as well as ethical aspect. We cannot say the scientific committee has seen the scientific aspect and ethics committee should not see. We need to understand that anything which is unscientific in nature is also unethical in nature. And that's why many times the clash start coming between the institutional ethics committee and the scientific committee. Whatever said and done, respect to all the committees, finally ethics committee approval letter is the most important. There are many organizations where there are many ethics committee demarcated for the better performance of those ethics committee, so that the natural justification can be done when the proposal is read. Because you must have realized during COVID time and after that, lot of studies have come, and when this large number of studies comes, unless we have a multiple ethics committee or we have a more number of meetings, naturally the justification or the justice to those proposals may not be possible. Now we need to understand how is the composition of ethics committee. It is a multidisciplinary and multi-sectoral nature. Members are 8 to 12. Now even till 15 members are permitted. A chairman is always from outside. The purpose of chairman from outside so that it has a more veto power to disapprove or not approve a particular study, member secretaries from the same institution which will take care of the administrative aspect, and there are a mix of medical, non-medical, scientific and non-scientific person. And why this is important? Because we realize when there's a group of people, a non-scientific people have a different angle of thinking. Layperson with different angle of thinking. Layperson with some background on science will have a different understanding. A legal person will have a different understanding. And as a researcher from the medical side, we'll have a different understanding. And finally, our research output has to be accepted in the best possible ethical and scientific way by the community. And that's why the mix of all these group of people is required. And probably India is the only country or one of the important country where the chairperson is from outside the institution, so that there's a more veto power given to the chairman for disapprove that study or not approving the study. Many times now you must have realized when you open your WhatsApp, a lot of Google Forms keeps coming. And in our institution, we just don't blindly approve any Google form, because the whole purpose of doing a good quality scientific study gets lost when these kind of Google Forms being used in a WhatsApp survey. Now, the timeline is very, very important, because one of the major issue which is faced by many investigators is the time involved in the getting the ethics committee approval. Say, for example, today is the 14th January, and on 14th January, I have announced that on 27th of January, there is going to be ethics committee meeting. My next ethics committee meeting is going to be almost after 45 days or probably after 2 months. In such a scenario, if I miss a deadline of submitting to ethics committee, naturally I have lost 2 months. And that's why whenever I think of planning a research, immediately the first thing, before even writing the title and the objective of the study, I should call up the ethics committee and find out when is the next ethics committee meeting, so that I get enough idea of the timeline by which I need to submit the form. We need to know the SOP of the particular ethics committee where we are involved. Now we have in India institutional ethics committee, where each participant or each researcher, whoever is working in that particular area, have to go to their own institution. The centralized ethics committee concept is relatively new in India, and only in the case of COVID, where the government of India with ICMR has formed a national ethics committee. Otherwise, the centralized ethics committee may or may not be feasible at this stage, other than the COVID, though many of the foreign countries have that concept, and India is evolving nature. We need to have a ethics committee approval from the institution where we are working, and that's why we need to know complete SOP. As I was telling you, one of the major thing which has happened on the 6th May 2020 guidelines is the IEC ICMR standardized form, and that form will help us to make the entry in a standardized way. And if you see that form is very, very simple, in the form of a checklist which can tick mark as we fill up any online form nowadays, and we need to attach the protocol along with that. And we need to submit at least 15-20 days in advance, so that the ethics committee member can read it. And once they read it, naturally the discussion can be more and more fruitful when the investigator is called. Now, as though we are talking about these guidelines are actually legally binding indirectly. We also have the Schedule Y of the Drugs and Cosmetic Act, which largely takes care of the clinical trial. And when we talk about the clinical trial, it also means the drug trials, vaccine trials, surgical procedures, medical devices, diagnostic agents, with special reference to radioactive material, X-rays, and trials with herbal remedies. All these are legally binding because they are gazetted notified. And recently, last year, if I am not wrong, I think 19th March 2019, new drugs and clinical trial rules came into picture, which is again a big gazetted document to revolve around the new technology-based era on which. And that's why you must have realized when the COVID studies were approved, COVID vaccines are approved, new drugs and clinical trials rules were quoted, because they are the evolving guidelines which has come with respect to the clinical trial. As we were talking on ethics committee, there is also something called as animal ethics committee. I do not have any experience on animal ethics committee to talk on. I have only limited experience with the human ethics committee, where human participants are there. Just to say a simple animal ethics committee, also there are specific guidelines where the animals are used for the research. They need to have a animal house, and number of animals can be used for the research. And usually in animal studies, the number of animals, or the sample size relatively less compared to the humans, because many times the biological parameters have so much similarity, and that's why the sample size calculation gives a low sample size. But when it comes to human, the sample size at times is very large because lot of variations in the parameter. Next comes is the stem cell therapy and stem cell research. Now, stem cell therapy and research is also a evolving science since last probably a decade or so. And here, any study which involves a stem cell has to pass through two committees. One is a stem cell therapy and research committee, and second is the ethics committee. Both the committees' approval is very, very important. Now, once I have decided that all research proposal where finally the publication is going to come, where I'm going to do an oral or poster presentation, ethics committee submission is mandatory. I need to understand how to submit in the ethics committee. As I was telling you, there is a IEC ICMR standardized form which needs to be used. The protocol has to be written in great detail. The protocol has to be written in such a way, if I give it to somebody else, the person should be able to do the study in the same way as I wanted. But unfortunately, many times our protocols are poorly written. Unfortunately, the protocols are written in past tense. That means actually the study is over. Probably the journal is asking for ethics committee approval letter, and then we have gone to the ethics committee. No retrospective approval by the ethics committee is possible when the article is already at the publication stage or the analysis is done. Many times people write protocol also in a bit scientific way. Introduction is written in pages and pages and pages, probably goes to 10 to 15 pages. Methodology is written in probably a half a page or so. And when it comes to further analysis, it says that appropriate tables and statistical tests will apply. Probably we need to understand the methodology is the heart of the whole protocol. And unless we describe the methodology in great detail, I cannot explain what I am going to do. And if the same protocol is given to somebody else, that person also cannot understand what is going to be done. Informed consent is again very, very important aspect. And informed consent is not submitted only for the ethics committee purpose, but also it needs to be implemented at the ground level. Also, we need to attach the data collection tool or the form or the questionnaire or the Excel sheet or a Google form, whichever way is going to be collected. And finally, we need to have some annexure. Annexures are nothing but the permission forms, probably in the institution we need from a dean of the medical college or the university authorities. And if we are going for a collaborative studies, probably we'll need email from them. We need a MOU from them. If there is some material transfer agreement, we need Government of India permission. And from the COVID-19 guidelines of 6 May 2020, any foreign collaboration needs to have a health ministry screening committee approval, not only just for material transfer agreement, even for a simplest study. Even if I am trying to have a collaborative or international study on certain aspect related to COVID, and it is a simple Google form which is going to be circulated, again, health ministry screening committee approval is required for any kind of international collaboration when it is planned. Next comes to the protocol. As I told you, the methodology of the protocol is the heart of the study. Whenever I look at the protocol, I again remember the airline crash investigation, which I was telling you. If something goes wrong in the documentary or role play, the pilot who is at that stage starts reading some thick fat books. Those thick fat books are nothing but the protocols. And those protocols are not written by that pilot himself, but written by a group of pilots earlier. Same way, our protocol of the research has to be written, which is well written, so that it is not understandable by me, but also understandable by the other people at the later date. But what happens, unfortunately, many times after few days, even I don't understand what I have written in my protocol. That kind of a poor understanding and poor writing of the protocol happens, and how ethics committee people are going to understand. It has to be specifically sound with the scientific design. When we talk about scientific design, we are talking about two important aspects. One is the important epidemiological science, and second is the hardcore biological science. When I mean epidemiological science, say for example, I use the term prevalence is going to be calculated with a cohort study, is almost impossible. If I say incidence is going to be calculated with a cross-sectionally, is totally wrong. If I say I'm going to do a particular efficacy study on the basis of a cross-sectional study or an observational study, is totally wrong. Those kind of objectives can never be approved by ethics committee. Probably a year back or 2 years back, I read one article abstract which was brought to me by one of the clinical postgraduates saying that I want to do this study. And when I started reading the abstract, it was saying that we conducted randomized cross-sectional cohort study. Now, all those people who understand these kind of different design, there is nothing called as randomized cross-sectional cohort study. Now, what will happen when many clinicians with the poor knowledge on epidemiology are going to do this kind of study? One day, this study will become a standard practice, which probably is 100% wrong. And second aspect of science comes is the hardcore science in the biology. Suppose I'm doing a study with biomarkers, or I'm doing a study with the genetics. In that case, I need to have a detailed description of those things, what I am doing, so that it is a replicable by any other researcher. Many times, unfortunately, we want to hide our information, or we do not want to disclose because we want to be the first in person. And that's why we do not give those details. Let me publish and then we'll do it. Actually, it is a probably wrong thing on our part also. It's better you inform the world that you are the first person who have come with the descriptive biomarker, or you are the first person who has come with the descriptive genetics, and put in the public domain with the Clinical Trial Registry of India, so that world in the whole scenario knows that you are the first person, and people cannot copy. People have to cite your document as an important thing. Next important aspect which comes for any researcher, and a biggest headache for a researcher, is the sample size. Many times I have seen the researchers come to the statistician or the people who knows the methodology, please give me sample size as least as possible, which is feasible for me. Now, sample size concept is depend on scientific aspect as well as logistic and feasible aspect. And then we need to consider the same thing. On the lighter sense, if I say, if I'm doing a study on astronauts and my sample size comes to 1000, my 10 generations will never get 1000 astronauts. But if I feel that study is very, very important for astronauts, I can still do with the lesser sample size. But at the same time, I need to understand I'm carrying a risk of not getting something statistically significant and clinically relevant. And those things are very, very important. And that's why sample size is very, very important with the science. Take as maximum sample size as required scientifically possible. But there are going to be occasions when the enough sample size is not possible. Take the example of today, when we say COVID cases have come down in India and many of the countries. If we want to do a COVID study, naturally the sample size getting now will take a longer time compared to the earlier time when there was a peak in India. And we need to understand that kind of studies are also possible with the less sample size, provided we know what is the risk we are carrying at the outcome of the study. If we do not realize the outcome of the study, how those outcome has to be interpreted with the great caution, that the smaller sample size should not be considered. Now with COVID coming into picture, you must have realized n number of studies are being done in last 1 year, and the literature has become very, very heavy with the COVID studies. Each and every person is doing COVID studies, and unfortunately or fortunately, many of these COVID studies revolve around the Google form, and many times they are the waste of many people's time, unless those Google form surveys are done honestly and judicially. And that's why many, as I was telling you, in our ethics committee, we do not blindly approve each and every kind of a Google form. Many times the same population of COVID patients are repeatedly troubled with the different studies. We need to understand COVID is a different scenario. There's a stressful life. There's a post-COVID syndrome. And if the same human participant is going to be taken, consent, and all the questions will be asked for different kind of COVID study, is going to be very, very difficult for that individual to participate. Pilot study. Now, pilot study is one of the commonest abused word in the literature. Many times, even ethics committee member tell you, okay, your sample size is very less. What you do is please put in the title as a pilot study. Now, pilot study is not the meaning for a small sample size study. If you go through an article which was published in BMC Research Methodology, which describes what is the meaning of pilot study. Pilot study doesn't mean a small sample size study. The pilot study is the study where we are doing a feasibility. We are looking at the thing, if I have developed a questionnaire, or if I'm doing a certain kind of a biomarker or a genetic study, can it be done? Is it feasible? That's the most important aspect of the pilot study, and not the small sample size. In the poll, this was the second question what we wanted to explain everybody. Pilot study is not the small sample size study. It is nothing but a feasibility study, or it is something called as equal to a net practice before we go for a final cricket match. The net practice is nothing but a pilot study. And when I was just changing over the tab, I realized there was one question: can a pilot study done be before ethics committee approval? 100% no. The pilot study is only possible after the ethics committee approval is obtained, and ethics committee will clearly understand that unless the pilot study, which talks about the feasibility of the whole research, is successful, the main study may not be started. And only to help the researcher. Ethics committee people do not say that first do pilot study, come back to ethics committee, and then again final approval is required. Usually when ethics committee approval is granted, indirectly it means that the pilot study or the feasibility study will be done after ethics committee approval. And depending on the pilot study result, if the same thing has to be followed, they can continue to the study. If there are any changes as required in the proposal or in the consent form or in the form of a questionnaire or the tool or a biomarker or a genetics, then the researcher has to come as an amendment to the ethics committee, and unless those amendments are approved, the study cannot be started. So it is a whole cycle from the day when you start thinking about the research till it process further. The informed consent is one of the important pillar when we talk about the research. Is a communication between the human participant and the researcher, and it has to be in a written format. Now with COVID coming into the picture, the 6th May guideline has approved online informed consent form in the form of a Google Meet or in the form of an online video. And nowadays also with the physical distancing, we can conduct these kind of informed consent. And these kind of informed consents are very, very important in India. As we know, informed consent process at times starts with family taking into consent. Now, informed consent has to be in great detail. Many times our people in informed consent in 20-30 pages may not be able to understand everything, and that's why we need to explain the informed consent in great detail, give the informed consent form to the human participant, let them discuss with the family, come after a few days, and then participate in the research rather than telling yes and no on the same day. The informed consent should have nature and purpose of the study, duration of participation, what is the procedure involved, how many times they have to come, what are the investigations involved, what are the risk and discomfort involved, and what are the final benefits which a participant will get, which a community get, or the research community get. Policy on compensation if something goes wrong, what are the medical treatment available, and what happens if something goes wrong, what are the steps taken for ensuring the confidentiality and no loss of benefit on withdrawal. Say for example, a participant has joined in a study of a 2-year in nature which has a long-term follow-up and involves a lot of funding, and the participant has joined today and goes on for 1 year with the study where lot amount of money is spent on the research. And after 1 year, if the patient say, if that human participant say I do not want to take part in that study, he has a full right to withdraw. And as a researcher, I cannot say, see, you have taken part in the study and I have invested so much of money, my whole money is gone there since you participated. All those things are not found in the ethics guideline. It is very clear that without any loss of the benefit, the person can immediately say that my data can be erased from the whole literature. And that's why when clinicians are doing the research, they have to be making very, very clear that even if you say no to my research, your treatment will not get affected. And when I'm doing a medical education study, I have to inform the students that students, if you do not take a part in me as a HOD, my study, even if your marks and the grades are not going to affect it. And that's why in our organization, we have come with a rule that whenever the researcher doing a medical education study, if they are going to be examiner, then they need to inform the controller of examination, and the controller of examination will take a necessary call depending on the research and how close research involved between the researcher and the student, and accordingly the examiner may be requested not to be examiner for that particular batch where the research is done. Finally, what happens at the event of commercialization, the benefit has to be given because they were part of the that kind of a study. Contact details of PI, local PI, chairman of ethics committee has to be given so that any violation happens, they can approach those people. Voluntary participation is very, very important, and it has to be voluntary, not just for the documenting and informed consent, but also applying in the practice. Whenever genetics and HIV things are being used, we need to follow those guidelines. Whenever storage samples are going to be used, not for my own study, but any future study, a separate kind of informed consent will also be required, where we have to come back to ethics committee because we are using the anonymized stored samples. If I'm storing the sample only for my study and they are going to be destroyed, as per the guidelines later on, only one ethics committee approval required. But now in many of the lab-based studies, the samples are stored for future studies. Since samples are collected, at that time they have to take a informed consent in the form of a WHO informed consent for future use from the human participant, as well as a second ethics committee approval will be required. A fresh or re-consent will be required whenever there's a change in the protocol, unconscious patient becomes conscious, or a child less than 18 years becomes 18 years, or there is going to be any publication photographs which can reveal the identity. Thus, informed consent becomes very, very challenging with the illiterate patients where witness is required. The family members have to be involved. And now in a COVID era, we need to have a online consent mechanism which is probably recorded. Retrospective studies where human data recorded in medical records or medical education units are going to be used. They can approach the ethics committee and request for the waiver of informed consent. And ethics committee in their own wisdom can decide to give waiver of informed consent or not to give waiver of informed consent. Whenever the samples are going to be stored other than one particular study for another future study, naturally WHO format of future use of stored sample informed consent has to be taken. And again, a separate undertaking from the ethics committee has to be taken whenever that study is planned. Online consent and online ethics committee approval is become important aspect in the 6th May Indian guidelines as well as the international guidelines, and we have to face the challenges because of the COVID. Right now, the number of cases have reduced, but earlier, when the cases were very high, how to do that kind of study was very, very difficult. Researchers is going to go with full PPE in the COVID ward. Are we going to allow so many researchers to enter into the COVID ward, or somebody else will help us in taking the research information, or we will be using some kind of online consent and online data collection method? Those challenges were there with the COVID-19. Many of the schools-based studies are going to get affected, and that's why we have to be very careful when the ethics committee and the researchers are planning a school-based study. Currently, some of the states, the schools have opened. Some of the states, the schools are closed. Some of the states, the schools are open only for 10th and 12th standards. We have to make sure the students, at the school students and the college students, are also under stress because of their education, because of their future thinking, and also because of online training stress or online learning stress which is going on. It is not very, very easy. We need to understand the online webinars have become common, online teaching has common, but still those students are at too much of stress. And when I am planning a school-based study, the students should not be given undue extra stress because of my study. They should not be called to the school only because I am doing the study. They should not be given too much online informed consent and online data collection, which will lead to more and more stress. And that's why there is a good communication required, not only because of between the researcher and the school student, also between the ethics committee and the researcher, so that unnecessary stress among those students can be avoided. As I was telling about, COVID patient access was one of the important things. What happens when a person is diagnosed with the COVID? The family goes into the quarantine, the parents goes into the quarantine, legal guardian may or may not be available. How you are going to take a consent is also going to be very, very challenging. And that's why we need to come with the many, many innovative ways in the COVID thing, how the online consent mechanism can be planned. And those innovative mechanisms have to be really taken into consideration by the ethics committee, and then only necessary approval has to be obtained. Online IEC meeting is also permitted in this new guidelines. As I was telling you earlier, whenever a stored samples is used, we need to take a separate ethics committee approval whenever we plan for another study. Whenever we are planning to have a questionnaire based study, it's better that we develop our own questionnaire. But whenever we are using the scale of somebody else, we need to take a permission of that person who has developed that scale. But there are certain scales which are in a long time in a public domain, say Apgar score. Probably those kind of scales may not need to have any permission, but proper citation is required. Online survey, online Google Forms, online platform, again need to have a proper justice and proper judicial thinking, that kind of things are really required and does not unnecessarily become waste of the research what we are involving in. Cost of the research related investigations are very, very important. Whenever the research leads to an investigation, the research cost, the cost of the investigation has to be fulfilled by the researcher. Say, for example, my research needs to lead to MRI of an individual. The MRI cost has to be borne by me. But in the case of COVID, the CT scan otherwise will be done also for the patient management. In such cases, when I'm only taking the CT scan information from those COVID patients, then the cost of the CT scan will not be borne by the researcher. And that's why we need to be very careful. If the research is leading to the investigation, the costs have to be borne by the researcher or the investigator. Finally, what happens? We get either approval, we get approval with condition, we don't get approval, or they will ask for some more clarification, which may take some time. And finally, a letter of this kind will be generated where the ethics committee approval is obtained. And many of known people come and tell me, my ethics is over. We need to understand ethics doesn't over only with the ethics committee submission of documents, but it starts from the day when the research is thought, and it goes on till the discovery, till the publication comes, and till the public health benefit comes. As to make it more and more open and transparency, we have a WHO ICMR clinical trial registry platform where all the clinical trials have to be registered. And last couple of years, if you see this clinical trial website, and this in the corner is not only the clinical trials, all studies where the experimental is nature is there, some kind of intervention is there, they have to be registered. Today, any researcher who plans to conduct a trial involving human participant of any intervention such as drug, surgical procedures, preventive measures, lifestyle modification, educational and the behavioral treatment also have to be registered with the clinical trial. Many times people feel that only if I'm doing a clinical trial that have to be registered, but even lifestyle modification, educational studies, behavioral studies where the intervention is involved, the CTRI registration is required. And as per 6th May 2020 guideline, CTRI registration is mandatory for all COVID studies. Suppose I am doing a one Google survey form and tomorrow I am going to present in an oral or poster conference. Is it required COVID CTRI registration? Yes. CTRI registration is mandatory for all COVID-19 studies. And this is the third question we wanted to put in our poll to say that, do you think COVID-19 studies will require a CTRI registration? And it is mandatory for all COVID-19 studies to go for CTRI registration, even if they are simple observational studies or simple Google form. Just to take a last few take-home messages, it is expected that all conducting research in India should be well versed with the guidelines. We cannot say I don't know about the research. As a traffic policeman, if catches me, I cannot tell him that I don't know the traffic rules. I have to know. There is no way out. And that's why many times, in addition to the research, there are a lot of ethical guidelines which are getting updated, and it's always better to meet the ethics committee member secretary to get a knowledge of those updated guidelines. Ideally, all research proposals have to go to ethics committee, including the oral and poster presentation planned for a conference. Also, we need to understand unscientific studies are unethical in nature and they have to be not approved. And that's why please make sure your studies are very, very scientific, with proper discussion, proper understanding of the sample size and all other scientific aspects which were required. And finally, use the ICMR IEC standardized ethics committee form for the submission, and properly protocol has to be in great detail with informed consent process and all the annexures which are required. And the most important, the whole scenario, whenever we are planning a research, apply ethical principles in practice. Don't create these documents only for the purpose of submission to ethics committee. Unless those ethical principles, the informed consent, the protocol, things what we have planned has to be planned in the real practice. Otherwise, you must have seen many times these participants tell that after something goes wrong, that I was not informed about this, I was not informed about this. And that's why we have to make sure all those ethical principles are applied in the practice. And now COVID is adding further things. All COVID related 19 guidelines for clinical practice, all COVID related government of India, state government guidelines and COVID-19 guidelines with the research have to be also implemented with online best mechanism of possible informed consent and online ethics committee meetings, etc., which are there. And also these guidelines are going to be dynamic in nature, are going to be updated as and when new scientific aspects comes, new ethical aspect comes, and we need to be very clearly apply those principles and update our knowledge and talk to ethics committee member secretary and the members to get evolved with many new rules. Thank you very much for the patient hearing. I'll be very happy if there are few questions, and now I'll be able to see also the chat box to say that if something is required which needs to be considered. Thank you very much. Thank you all of you for patient hearing. I hope that probably last 1 hour what we took it, some important take home message will be helpful to all of you and is not the mere waste of time. As we discuss more and more these guidelines, naturally there will be a good human experience between the ethics committee members and researchers and the human participant to evolve and to take the science and the research into the next level.
Thank you, Pankaj. It was a very insightful presentation with a balance of theory and a lot of practical aspects, and really thankful to you. I have sent you the questions on your WhatsApp, or I could read out one by one and you can answer. What do you prefer?
I think it's better if you read one by one and answer. That will be better, so that if I don't know, I can easily say I don't know, and
Sure.
then people also know I also don't know so many things.
Sure. I'll do that. Okay. So the first question is, do we need ethical approval for secondary review? I think so, which you have already answered. Do you want to take it again?
Only to say that the secondary review involves what kind of aspect. If it's just a record-based study where the records is going to be transferred from one place to another, and secondary review is going to be taken, ethics committee approval law not required. As I was sorry, the ethics committee approval is required, but the informed consent from the patient is not required. Like say all the record which is lying in my records department of a hospital or my medical education unit, I have to go to ethics committee and take their approval. Only informed consent can be waived by the ethics committee. There is a big data being collected. There is a big data being collected in lot of government of India and lot of surveys all over the world. All those data, if they are anonymized, then the data can be used with due ethics committee approval. So again, I want to repeat, ethics committee approval is mandatory, but informed consent may be waived off by ethics committee.
Thank you. And for the next question is for multi-institutional investigator collaboration. Do we need an ethics review at each institution?
Yes. Today we are not in a era where the central ethics committee approves and all ethics committee will take that decision, because each and every ethics committee is independent in nature. Whenever a multi-center or multinational studies are being done, the institution where the main PI is there, that institution approves their ethics committee, and also all the places wherever the research is going to be conducted, all those institutions also have to get their ethics committee approval done, because there are experiences where there many times the one ethics committee approves the study and another ethics committee may not approve the study. In such a scenario, since it's an independent body by themselves, the institutions where the ethics committee does not approve the study cannot be done. In foreign country, there is a mechanism of centralized ethics committee is there. In India, it is evolving, but at present, we have to go to each and every institution where the ethics committee is there to take the approval. The question will come when the people in the private practice are involved. They have to approach the nearby institutions, and if those institutions are willing, they can take to those ethics committee the approval. But I do not think so a centralized committee approving for all over India or for all over the world with multi-country study, it is possible. Each and every institution has to give ethics committee approval, then only study can plan. DHR accredited ethics committee is important and mandatory. Now ICMR has come with DHR registration. I am not 100% aware about this question. The DHR is accrediting the independent ethics committee, yes or no? I am not sure. I'll try to find out and get back to you. Because earlier also there were a lot of independent ethics committee were there, and when a drug controller of India made a mandatory registration with DCGI, some of the independent ethics committee in the initial phases were not given the approval, and later on some of them came with the due approval. So I am 100% not sure what is the current status at present if DCGI or DHR is accredited in the independent ethics committee.
Okay, next question is, can I start collecting data before getting an IEC approval, or can I do a pilot before IEC approval?
The pilot study has to be done only after ethics committee approval, and ethics committee approval indirectly means that the pilot is done and no major amendments are required, and the study is progressed further for next 1 year. Whenever amendments are happening or a pilot study is done and some changes are required, they have to come back to ethics committee in the form of an amendment letter. And after 1 year, whatever progress is there, they have to again come to ethics committee, because usually the ethics committee approval is for 1 year. So pilot study also have to be done after ethics committee approval. Pilot cannot be done before ethics committee approval.
Thank you. How long should I archive the signed informed consent form?
Actually, earlier there was a thinking that all these documents have to be stored for 15 years. And when we went to the 2006 guideline of ICMR, it has given different kind of documents to be stored by ethics committee, the principal investigator, and the CRF, and the sponsor, and the pharma company. But now, as per the newer guidelines, if I am not wrong, all the documents should be stored at least for minimum 5 years for the informed consent as well as other documents. The problem comes is when people are doing PhD or some other kind of study, that study itself is more than 5 years. In those cases, the document have to be stored for a reasonable time period, at least 3 to 5 years after the study is over. And that's why just by mere number of 5 years may not be applicable for those studies which involve longer nature per se in the timeline.
Okay. When the data was collected, the investigator did not seek consent for further use beyond the study objectives. Can we still share the data onwards?
Now, this data is of two types. One is the data which is collected in the questionnaire in the form of say clinical symptoms or some kind of investigation information or something, or the data in the form of a blood sample, urine sample, or some kind of a sample stored in the lab. Now, as far as the data which is recorded in a simple paper or a simple form kind of a data, they have to go to ethics committee and ask for waiver of informed consent. And if a institution ethics committee believes that the data is truly anonymized and no way the identification of individuals can come out, they may in their own wisdom give approval. If they don't give approval, there is no way we can do anything else. We have to keep talking to ethics committee and come to some kind of a best possible way to use the data. When it comes to the samples which are stored in the lab, the samples cannot be used unless there is a future use consent form taken earlier. And here also, ethics committee in their own wisdom may rarely, I am again repeating, may rarely permit us to use those samples wherever that future use informed consent, which is a separate informed consent, is not taken. And that's why nowadays it is always many investigations prefer to take the future use informed consent along with the main study informed consent so that those samples can be used, because scientists believe that when the stored samples are there, why unnecessary waste the energy and pain and all those things in the human participant. But ethics committee separate approval is required where they will use their own wisdom to decide if that study can be allowed or not allowed.
Okay. Because of the COVID-19 situation, we have shifted to a lot to the virtual mode. So, the increase in online data collection, as you also mentioned. So, do we have any guidelines in place to address the online data collection, and or can you please address the issues around the signed consent in an online form?
Now, online data collection, online video, online things has evolved a lot in COVID-19. Earlier, it was limited to use in the clinical practice when the X-ray of one patient was sent by a resident to a clinician in WhatsApp and they were reporting and coming back. Now, with so much of information passing on online, storage is going to be very, very challenging. And that's why when the investigators are attached to the institution, there should be some mechanism where the data, whatever is collected online, is stored in the servers which belong to the institution, where proper security is managed, proper firewalls are there, so that the unnecessary or undue hacking and other things cannot happen. But if I am a researcher and I will say all my online informed consent form of the data is going to be used in my mobile, and the mobile is going to become a family mobile or a department mobile, even by mistake the data can be transferred to some unknown or unrequired person, then it's going to be very, very challenging. And that's why many times these kind of Google forms and these kind of online things should be institutionalized basis, where they remain in the server which belongs to institutions, or there can be some tie-up with the cloud-based companies where the privacy and confidentiality maintained and that server area belongs to the institution and the researcher or the team of researcher. Otherwise, in an online era, getting circulation intentionally, unintentionally, by mistake in WhatsApp or so many other things may happen, and it's going to be really big challenge for the researcher if that participant or somebody challenges the researcher.
Yeah, thank you. That clears up a lot of things. If another question is, if my study participants are mentally...
Kavita, one more thing. Also, I want to emphasize the government of India has a IT guideline and digital health guidelines. We need to follow also those guidelines when the data is archived in a digital form. Please go ahead.
Okay. Next question is, if my study participants are mentally challenged population from a psychiatric hospital or a mental health unit, does approval from the head of the institute or any other official bypassing the participants' consent considered ethical? And any other issues related to that you can.
If you ask me just blindly, I will say it is unethical. Head of the institution, for that matter, is a simple school or even a psychiatry hospital or mental health, can only provide the access to the participants, cannot give an informed consent on their behalf. We need to understand the informed consent process which happens in the emergency during a clinical practice and what is happening in the research. In the clinical practice, there are specific guidelines. If suppose some unknown person comes to an emergency, how the consent will be taken for treatment. That is totally different. But when it comes to the research, it has to be very clear. The participant should be able to give the informed consent, or the relative or the legal guardian of the participant has to be giving the informed consent. I do not think so a head of a psychiatric department or a mental health unit can become the overall guardian to give an informed consent for a research and specifically for clinical trial. And that's why ethics committee in own wisdom has to decide. But if I get a chance, I'll probably not approve that kind of study where the head of the institutions has given the approval. I will try to find out how important that study is to be done. If that study is very, very important, then again, a lot of discussion has to be required. A lot of experts have to be called to get their opinion, and then decision will be taken. But if I feel that study is not very important, if that study can be done in a adult normal people also, then 100% those studies will not be approved. But at no way head of the institution can give the informed consent on behalf of the participants.
Okay, I have another question which is related to the registration of ethics committee of medical colleges. So it says, is registration conditional or mandatorily required for all medical colleges?
Now there are two things when what happens in the medical college. Now one thing which is a clinical trial, and second is the all the studies which are not on the clinical trial basis. I think if I'm not wrong, 5 or 6 years back, DCGI or Central Licensing Authority already came out with the guideline that all ethics committee which are reviewing clinical trials have to register with DCGI. So that was almost 6 years back or something like that. So no study, no ethics committee can review the clinical trial since last 6 years without DCGI approval. But at that point of time, there was no mandatory registration for exclusive committee. I'm again repeating, exclusive committee which are reviewing non-clinical trial proposal. Like say for example, in an institution there is only one ethics committee which is going to register with clinical trial, which is going to review the clinical trial as well as non-clinical trial proposal. In such cases, 6 years back only they have to register with clinical trial registry of DCGI. There is no way out. But there are institutions where multiple ethics committees coming up for a judicial view of these reviews. In those cases, the committee which is registering with the clinical, which are looking for clinical trial, has to register 6 years back only, or even more than that when that rule came into picture. As far as the ethics committee which are exclusively reviewing non-clinical trial proposal, a pure observational studies, or the experimental studies where the drug devices, surgical procedures, those biological reagents and the herbal medicines are not involved, now they have to register. Now they have to register as per the new drugs and the clinical trial rules of 2019. If I am not wrong, that Gazette notification came on 19th March of 2019, and there was 6-month window period given. By those 6 months, all ethics committee have to be registered. That means if there is only one committee for clinical trial and other proposals, they would have registered by this time 6 or 7 years back. But if there are multiple committees, and the committee which is exclusively reviewing non-clinical trial proposal, now it is mandatory from 19 September 2019 onwards that they have to be registered. If they are not registered, then they cannot review the proposal. And that's why there's a special website created by ICMR for registering those ethics guidelines. And with our experience, the ICMR committee, they are really very, very friendly, and DHR committee is really very helpful, where they really guide us on how to do the registration. I'm really happy to have that kind of a good network with the DHR registration process.
Thank you, Pankaj. And a participant has asked if you could kindly share your experiences or thoughts about IEC's on-site monitoring challenges and solutions in COVID-19 studies.
IEC monitoring is always very, very difficult. But when we say ethics committee approval, it also means that the monitoring should happen. Now, just take the example of clinical trial. Suppose in an ethics committee which is exclusively reviewing clinical trial, and there are only 4 or 5 clinical trials. On case-to-case basis, they can decide how frequently the monitoring has to happen for this clinical trials, and they can go to the site by informing the PI that when they are going to come by a team, and a checklist can be prepared, and on the basis of that checklist, the people can decide if the informed consent process was taken properly, the documentation was properly, the drugs and etc. stored properly, etc., etc., as per protocol, and there's any protocol deviation has happened. But in case the protocol deviation has not happened, then what other issues might have happened, we need to take care. But when we talk about observational studies, observational studies are large in number. Say, for example, there are 30, 40, 100 observational studies. Again, it is going to be very, very difficult for ethics committee to monitor all observational studies. And that's why it is always better we take a case-to-case based decision on the monitoring is required or no. Again, coming back to the clinical trial, a clinical trial is a simple clinical trial, not having much issues, but still, if the ethics committee feels that there is a monitoring is required, on-site monitoring has to be done, it is going to be very, very challenging. And that's why probably those 15 members can divide themselves in a group of 2 or 3 members, different teams, and that small committees have to be authorized by the whole committee under the leadership of the chairman of that clinical trial committee to do on-site monitoring. They can even go at a surprise visit to really see the informed consent is happening properly or no, because the documents may be proper, but how the informed consent explanation process is happening between the researcher and the patient or the human participant is also worth viewing it. And that's why on-site monitoring is required. Case-to-case basis it can be decided. In COVID era is going to be very, very difficult. And that's why when I said the COVID challenges, we have to come out with very innovative way. Is the ethics committee members are going to go with the PPE inside, or the process will be seen on an online mode in a different room? Those kind of things have to be done. Documentation probably may not be difficult to review, because those documentation with the due safety precautions can brought into another room near the clinical site area and can be reviewed. The most important we need to understand in the monitoring is not only just viewing a document. We have to see how the informed consent mechanism is happening between the researcher and human participation, and that is the most important aspect in monitoring, and it's going to be very, very challenging in COVID. And probably with the technology we can use something similar to a Google Meet or go to webinar or something like an online platform to see how the online mechanism is happening, and with video recording of those informed consent also can be viewed. But always is better to have a live informed consent in front of you to make doubly sure that the informed consent is happening properly.
Okay. Thank you, Pankaj. There is one more question. It says, in a questionnaire-based study on school involving children with no ethics committee in the school, what should a principal investigator do after getting the ethics committee approval from the present institution?
No, just coming back, I don't know if somehow the miscommunication has come from my side. If I am the researcher, I am doing a school-based study, I need to take ethics committee approval from my own institute. And then I need to approach the principals of the schools to give me the necessary permission to get the access to the student. If those are government schools, or I'm planning to take a big district or something, or a big state, I have to go to the Directorate of the Education to get all necessary approvals, only to provide the access. School, I don't think so, will have their own ethics committee. After getting the permission to access to the students, either from the directorate, from the government, or the principal, then I need to make a informed consent from the parents of those people or those children who are studying that. And once the parent gives an informed consent, if the child is more than 7 years, I have to also take a assent from the child to participate in this study. In the whole process, during COVID time, we need to be careful that the student should not be in undue stress of online discussion for my research, or unnecessary coming to the schools when they are not required to come. But I do not think so. I have communicated at any point of time, the schools will have their own ethics committee.
Yeah. Thank you, Pankaj. As of now, these are the questions that we have. In case any of the audience members wants to ask a question, you could unmute yourself and you can go
There is
live
one
on
more,
video.
there is one more question put by Dr. Maltese, sir. Is it mandatory to revise the SOP version of IEC as per 2020 guidelines? Yes, sir. We need to revise the SOP of IEC. I understand at times the SOP revision is a very hectic and a lengthy process, but looking at the emergency of COVID-19 and other things, probably an annexure can be added on the basis of ICMR guidelines and the Government of India guidelines and state government guidelines, how the research can be conducted. And over in a due process of time, that annexure can be incorporated in more detail in the respective chapters where required. But 100% SOP revision in the era of COVID 2020, we have to revise the SOP at least bare minimum as a form of an annexure where the important highlights of the research can be done during COVID time has to be indicated.
Yeah, thank you, Pankaj. I kind of missed that question. If any of the audience members wants to ask a question, you can unmute yourself and can go live on video, anything, whatever suits you.
There is one question. No, sorry, it is a poll, sorry. Only my request is please do not use the blind Google form for each and every kind of study. I understand in an academic era, Google forms and the publications are important. But as we move up and up in the ladder, we need to understand the judicial balance of the Google form and online discussion with the human participant, or the discussion with the human participant in a physical distancing mode is going to be very useful, because many times these Google forms are not filled up by the right people. They may not be filled up in the right mental framework when these questions are formed in the Google form. So probably we can avoid doing too much of online form based survey. I will not use the Google form because the Google is again a trademark, is a company, not against the Google company. It's just in general, online unnecessary forms please do not use, and do not encourage your postgraduates to use those kind of forms, because we are teaching something which is probably, I feel, not appropriate. There can be a lot of difference of opinion on this, and I'll be ready to accept those difference of opinions in science and ethics.
Thank you, Pankaj. I don't think there are any more questions. Can I ask Dr. Archishman for any closing comments?
Yeah, thank you, Pankaj sir. That was really thought-provoking. Ethics and its interpretation are a bit subjective at times, and it's if someone walks us through the guidelines, it becomes easy, because these documents, even if they are small, quite dense in their interpretation. So thank you for sharing your wisdom. And I see that there were many participants. If there are any questions that have not been taken up during the session, please feel free to write to us. You have our email ID, and we will get them clarified by Pankaj sir as per his convenience, and we'll append all such recordings or inputs to the video while we edit it and put it publicly.
Sir, if I can take, there's one more question.
Yes.
Ethically, who are involved in the multi-centric study should know the budget of the study and up to what level, site level and central level. If you ask me personally, the budget of the study should be displayed on the website of the proposal where it is recorded. It should not be confidential with all the details, who is getting how much and what happens, and where the all the disclosure of the financial disclosure is also very important, to say that my research is not only scientific but is also ethical. And that's why I keep telling, please do not create the document only for the submission to ethics committee. Those documents should be available to public domain. And finally, ultimately, those principles and the documents, written documents, has to be followed in practice in true letter and spirit to all the things, and not only till publication, but finally till the end of public health outcome, if we are looking at that.
Yeah, thank you, sir, for not missing out that question. I, as a team, we as a team are still exploring how to make these interactions more communicative, more interactive, bi-directional, multi-directional. So these are opportunities to know the speaker and also to know the participants. So if any of the participant members wants to come live and share any views regarding his or her experience with ethics committees, we'll use this opportunity. So kindly come live, switch on a video if you are comfortable and your audio, and share your wisdom. It's an open forum.
Sir, there is one more question, that is registration of ethics committee mandatory? I think I clarified that there is no doubt now it is mandatory, depending on what kind of proposals are being reviewed. If it's a clinical trial with central licensing authority as decided long back, or with DHR if they are taking up other kind of studies other than clinical trial.
Thank you, sir.
And thank you to Dr. Prasad Pore sir for sharing the DHR link address.
Yes, he has shared that link address. I do not know if the recordings capture the chat window or not, but
No, it captures the chat window also. The chat also comes into picture.
great. So that thing is there. I also checked while you're talking for the ICMR bioethics units common forms, and they're all listed. You can download the PDF version, you can download the Word document, you can download all at a go. So people can explore that. There's a format to arrange the CV as well. It's better to have your CV formatted according to that.
And even to add the question of which Maltesh sir has asked about it, even there is a SOP format is given in ethics committee in the COVID era in the same website after the form.
Yes. Sir, do you think it's a good idea that we organize a session where you walk everyone through how to fill out the CTRI, if you're comfortable like this, Clinical Trials Registry of India, how to fill out that particular form? And
Yes, we can work out, no problem, no issues. Even
right.
we can take both the things, ICMR, IC standardized form as well as CTRI, both we can take it up.
Yes. And also regarding collaborative research where the Health Ministry Screening Committee comes into picture, we can discuss some aspect of that.
Yes, earlier actually the Health Ministry Screening Committee was very, very important with material transfer agreement, and whenever the material used to go from India to abroad and all. But now if we read the 6th May COVID guideline, it says that any foreign collaboration has to have a Health Ministry Screening Committee approval.
We missed your bit, sir. Any foreign collaboration has to have the HMSC approval.
Yeah. If we read the 6th May Ethics Committee guideline, it says that any foreign collaboration during COVID pandemic time has to have a Health Ministry Screening Committee approval.
Okay.
If you open that guideline, it is almost not very big, some 17, 18 pages. And I think in one of the page at the lower part of the end, it says that all collaborations with the foreign organizations need to have a Health Ministry Screening Committee approval.
So even in the HMSC format, if you download, there are 4 forms, and they are quite aligned to the ICMR summary of writing a proposal. So when you're developing a proposal, maybe the format
Earlier HMSC clearance was in the form of a manual thing, but now they have already also updated, I think, in the online format where online application to HMSC can be done.
Right. So thank you again, Pankaj sir. Thank you all the audience. Over to Dr. Kavita.
Thank you all of you. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Kavita. And thank you all the participants for listening to me. And thank you to all my friends who have joined me, who know me well. Thank you all of you to making it as a big audience also. Thank you.
Thank you very much for to everybody for attending. And in case you have any follow-up queries or any other queries that you want, feel free to send it by email to the email that has been sent to you earlier. And we'll be able to take up the questions with Dr. Pankaj, and we'll get back to you on that. Thank you so much.
If there are topics that the audience wants to suggest, and if a member wants to talk on a particular topic or has someone in mind who could be invited as a speaker, you can please suggest us, and we'll definitely try and organize those sessions. These are usually fortnightly 10 days events, and we'll make it live each time.
Yeah.
Thank you, Pankaj sir. Thank you everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all of you. Thank you.